On a night when the sky wept and thunder rattled the very bones of the city, a desperate knock echoed on the door of a man who had nothing left to give. Ethan Hayes, a father, barely keeping his own head above water, opened that door to find two identical, rain-soaked little girls shivering on his threshold. They were lost silent and clutched a rain-smeared note with a single cryptic word. Taking them in was an act of simple kindness, a decision made in a heartbeat. He had no way of knowing that this single act would unravel a citywide panic pit him against unimaginable power and introduce him to their mother, Eleanor Vance, the most formidable CEO in the state, a woman who could buy his entire world with her pocket change. The rain against the window of Ethan Hayes' third-floor apartment wasn't just falling, it was attacking. Each drop was a tiny fist hammering against the glass part of a relentless assault orchestrated by the roaring Portland wind. Inside the world was small and warm. The air smelled of grilled cheese sandwiches and the faint, sweet scent of the bubble bath his 6-year-old daughter Chloe had taken an hour ago. For Ethan, this small bubble of warmth was a fortress against the world, a world that was often as cold and unforgiving as the storm outside. He was wiping down the worn-out linoleum countertop, his shoulders aching from a 10-hour shift, hunched over the sizzling grill at the Rose City Diner. The pay was barely enough to cover rent on this shoebox apartment in the city's less glamorous southeast side, the kind of place where sirens were a more common lullaby than crickets. But it was home. It was where Chloe's crayon drawings were taped to the refrigerator, a vibrant gallery of lopsided suns and stick-figure families, where a mother with angel wings watched over them. Jessica had been gone for 3 years, a sudden illness snatching her away and leaving a hole in their lives that Ethan was constantly trying to fill with double shifts and weary smiles. "Daddy, can Mr. Snuggles have the last crust?" Chloe asked from the living room floor, her small voice a beacon in the storm's cacophony. She was holding up a stuffed bear whose button eyes had been re-sewn so many times they were now mismatched. Ethan smiled the expression, pulling at the tired lines around his eyes. "Of course, sweetie. Mr. Snuggles looks hungry." He was about to turn back to the sink when he heard it. It wasn't the thunder or the wind. It was a sound that didn't belong, a soft, frantic tapping on their apartment door. He froze. Nobody came to their door this late, especially not in a storm that had the whole city hunkered down. His first thought was of Mr. Henderson from next door, an elderly man who sometimes got confused. "I'll be right back, Chloe," he said, his voice low. He moved quietly to the door, peering through the fisheye peephole. The hallway was dimly lit and the lens was distorted, but he could make out 2 small identical shapes. Children. His heart gave a sharp, protective thump. He undid the deadbolt and chain, pulling the heavy door inward. Standing before him were twin girls, no older than 7 or 8. They were soaked to the bone, their matching pink coats darkened to a deep maroon with rainwater. Their dark, shoulder-length hair was plastered to their pale faces, and their large hazel eyes were wide with a terror that seemed too big for their small frames. They weren't crying. They were eerily silent, shivering so violently he could see their teeth chattering. One girl clutched the hand of the other, so tightly her knuckles were white. My goodness, Ethan breathed, his mind struggling to process the sight. "Are you two okay? Where are your parents?" The girls just stared, their silence more profound than any wail. The one on the left held out a trembling hand. In it was a folded, soggy piece of paper. Ethan took it gently. It was expensive, thick stationery, but the ink had bled into a blurry, illegible mess. He could only make out 2 words written in an elegant looping script. Promise. Gardens. The rest was a blue smudge. Promise Gardens, Ethan murmured, looking from the note to their faces. Is that where you're from? The girl who had given him the note gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The other just continued to stare, her gaze fixed on something beyond him, lost in her fear. A blast of wind sent a spray of rain into the hallway, and the girls flinched. Ethan's paternal instincts, honed by 6 years of raising Chloe alone, took over completely. Logic, caution, the 100 questions swirling in his head, they all vanished. All he saw were 2 terrified children in desperate need of warmth and safety. Okay, come on, he said, his voice soft and reassuring. Let's get you inside. You're going to catch your death out here. He backed away, holding the door open wider. They hesitated for only a second before scurrying past him into the warmth of the apartment, dripping water onto the welcome mat. They stood just inside the door, huddled together like a pair of frightened fawns, their eyes darting around the small, humble space. Chloe had gotten up from the floor, her own eyes wide with curiosity. Daddy, who are they? Ethan closed and locked the door, shutting out the storm's fury. He looked at the 2 strange, silent girls who had appeared out of the tempest, then at his own daughter. He had no idea what he had just invited into their lives, but he knew he couldn't have left them out in it. For one night at least, they were his responsibility. He just prayed it wouldn't be a night he'd live to regret. The immediate challenge was the silence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb the sounds of the apartment, the hum of the old refrigerator, Chloe's inquisitive breathing, the relentless drumming of the rain. The twin girls stood on the mat, 2 perfect dripping statues, their gazes fixed on the floor. Okay, first things first, let's get you out of those wet clothes, Ethan said, forcing a gentle, calm tone he was far from feeling. He went to the small hall closet and pulled out the emergency blankets he kept relics from a charity drive years ago. He wrapped one around each of their shoulders. They accepted the gesture passively, their small bodies trembling beneath the fleece. He then rummaged through Chloe's dresser, pulling out 2 pairs of her warmest flannel pajamas, one with yellow ducks, the other with smiling planets. They would be a little short on the girls, but they were dry and warm. Here you go, he said, holding them out. The bathroom is just there. You can get changed. The twins looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them in a single glance. The one Ethan had mentally labeled the braver one. The one who'd held the note gave a small nod. Together they took the pajamas and padded into the bathroom, closing the door softly behind them. Chloe sidled up to her father, tugging on his jeans. Are they sisters, Daddy? They look like it, sweetie, he whispered, ruffling her hair. Why don't they talk? I think they're just very scared, Ethan said, his heart aching for them. He looked at their discarded pink coats, pooling water on the mat. They were well made, the kind of quality he'd see in the windows of downtown boutiques he could never afford to enter. Their shoes, small leather boots, now caked in mud, were of a similar high quality. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. These were not children who were used to being lost in a storm. When the girls emerged from the bathroom, they looked even smaller and more vulnerable in Chloe's bright pajamas. The sleeves were an inch too short, and the pants ended mid-calf, but they were no longer shivering. Ethan gathered their wet clothes and put them in a basket, making a mental note to toss them in the dryer later. Are you hungry? He asked. Again, a shared look, followed by a hesitant nod from the braver twin. All right, I make a world-famous grilled cheese. And I think I have some tomato soup. It was his go-to comfort food for Chloe, and tonight it felt like the only thing he could offer. As he worked at the stove, the familiar actions of buttering bread and opening a can of soup calmed his nerves slightly. Chloe, seeming to understand that the girls needed a gentle approach, went to her toy box. She returned not with a noisy, complicated toy, but with two of her most prized possessions, a smooth grey stone she'd found at the river and a small plush bird that chirped when you squeezed it. She approached the twins who had settled on the edge of the worn-out sofa and held out the items without a word. The second twin, the more withdrawn one, slowly reached out, and her fingers brushed against the soft bird. A flicker of something interest, maybe even comfort, passed over her face before she retreated back into her shell. Ethan brought over 2 steaming bowls of soup and plates with perfectly golden grilled cheese sandwiches cut diagonally the way Chloe liked. He set them down on the coffee table. "Go on, eat up," he urged gently. For a moment they just stared at the food. Then slowly the braver one picked up half a sandwich and took a small tentative bite. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She took another bigger bite. A moment later, her sister followed suit. They ate with a quiet, desperate hunger that spoke of an ordeal longer than just the storm. As they ate, Ethan tried again. "My name is Ethan and this is Chloe," he said, pointing to himself and then his daughter. "Can you tell me your names?" The braver twin swallowed her mouthful of soup. She looked at her sister, then back at Ethan. Her voice, when it finally came, was a tiny, fragile thing, barely a whisper. "Ava," she said, pointing to herself. Then she gestured to her sister. "And that's Zoe." A wave of relief washed over Ethan. A name. It was a start. Ava and Zoe. Those are beautiful names. It's very nice to meet you. Zoe didn't look up from her soup. "Do you know your mommy or daddy's phone number?" Ava Ethan asked, keeping his voice as non-threatening as possible. Ava shook her head. "We're not supposed to talk to strangers." The word sounded rehearsed, a rule drilled into her, and the irony of her saying it while sitting in his living room was not lost on Ethan. "That's a very good rule," he agreed immediately. "But I'm not a stranger who wants to hurt you. I want to help you find your family. Are they waiting for you at the Promise Gardens?" Ava's brow furrowed. "The Penrose Gardens," she corrected softly. "We were going with Uncle Julian to see the night-blooming jasmine." "Mummy." Mummy promised. Penrose Gardens. The name rang a bell. It was a famous, privately owned botanical garden on the other side of the city, in the opulent West Hills. A place of fundraising galas and $500-a-plate dinners. It was a world away from their current surroundings. Your Uncle Julian, Ethan prompted. "What happened to him?" Ava's face clouded over. The car made a loud noise, a bang, and it was raining so hard. "He told us to stay put. He went to get help, but he was gone a long time, and Zoe was scared of the dark." Zoe, hearing her name, looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. She let out a small whimper, and Ava immediately reached over, taking her sister's hand. "It's okay," Ava whispered to her, a fierce, protective tone in her voice. "I'm here." Ethan's heart twisted. The story was starting to form a tragic picture of a car breakdown and 2 scared little girls wandering off into the storm. He knew he should call the police. It was the responsible thing to do. He pulled out his phone, but then he looked at them. They were finally warm-fed and looking less like terrified apparitions and more like children. He imagined the harsh glare of police flashlights, the barrage of questions from uniformed strangers, the sterile environment of a precinct or a child services office. It felt cruel. "Just for tonight," he muttered to himself. "They're safe here. In the morning when the storm has passed, we'll figure it out." He made up the pull-out couch for them, using his own pillow and the quilt Jessica's mother had made for them as a wedding gift. Chloe, in a gesture of profound 6-year-old diplomacy, placed Mr. Snuggles between the two pillows. "He'll keep you safe from monsters," she declared with absolute authority. For the first time that night, a tiny, fleeting smile touched Zoe's lips. As Ethan tucked them in, Ava's small hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You won't leave us," she whispered, her hazel eyes pleading. "I won't leave you," Ethan promised, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I'll be right in the next room. You're safe here." He watched them for a moment longer before turning off the lamp. He retreated to his own room, leaving the door ajar. He didn't call the police. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, listening to the sound of the rain and the soft, even breathing of the 3 children in his home, acutely aware that his simple life had just become profoundly complicated. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving behind a city washed clean and unnervingly quiet. The first grey light of morning filtered through the blinds, painting stripes across Ethan's worn bedroom carpet. He hadn't slept much. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren had sent a jolt of anxiety through him. He kept replaying the decision not to call the police, a knot of doubt tightening in his gut with each passing hour. Was he protecting the girls, or was he just being a fool? He slipped out of bed and padded quietly into the living room. Ava and Zoe were still fast asleep on the pull-out couch, curled together under the heavy quilt like 2 nesting kittens. Chloe's stuffed bear, Mr. Snuggles, was tucked firmly between them. They looked peaceful, the terror of the previous night momentarily erased by sleep. Seeing them like that, so innocent and small, solidified his resolve. He couldn't just hand them over to a system. Not yet. He had to try to help them himself first. But the morning brought with it the harsh realities of his own life. It was a Friday, a work day. He had a shift at the diner starting at 8 a.m. Mr. Henderson from next door, his usual emergency babysitter, was visiting his sister for the week. He couldn't possibly leave Chloe here alone with 2 girls he barely knew, and he absolutely could not afford to lose a day's pay. His bank account hovered precariously close to zero just before every paycheck. Missing 1 shift could mean the difference between paying the electricity bill on time or facing a late fee he couldn't afford. His phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from his boss, a gruff but fair man named Sal. "Roads are a mess. Miller's car is flooded. Can you come in an hour early?" Ethan's heart sank. He stared at the phone, his mind racing. He couldn't go in early. He couldn't go in at all. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed out a reply, the lie feeling like sandpaper in his throat. "So sorry, Sal. Chloe's come down with a terrible fever. Woke up sick. Can't leave her. I don't think I can make it in today." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response was almost immediate. "Damn. All right. Keep me posted. Hope she feels better." Relief mingled with a fresh wave of guilt. He'd just jeopardized his job, the one thing that kept a roof over their heads, for 2 children whose last name he didn't even know. He took a deep breath, pushing the panic down. 1 step at a time. His first step was coffee. As the old machine sputtered to life, the girls began to stir. Ava sat up first, her eyes blinking in the unfamiliar surroundings before she remembered where she was. She visibly relaxed when she saw Ethan standing in the kitchen. A moment later, Zoe sat up too, rubbing her eyes. "Good morning," Ethan said, offering them a smile. "Did you sleep okay?" Ava nodded. "Is the rain gone?" "All gone," he confirmed. "How about some breakfast? I can make pancakes. I even have chocolate chips." This offer seemed to break through some of Zoe's reserve. Her eyes lit up. With smiley faces, Ethan chuckled. "I can certainly try." As he cooked, a sense of surreal domesticity settled over the apartment. Chloe woke up and was thrilled to have 2 new playmates. While Ethan flipped pancakes, the 3 girls sat on the floor, building a lopsided tower with Chloe's worn wooden blocks. For a moment, it was easy to forget that Ava and Zoe were lost, that a family somewhere was likely frantic with worry. But the reality of the situation came crashing back when he sat down with them. Ava, he began, gently placing a plate of chocolate chip smiley face pancakes in front of her. We need to find your mum and dad today. You mentioned the Penrose Gardens. Is your house near there? Ava shook her head. No, our house is near the water, the big river. We were just going to the gardens to see the flowers, the Willamette River. That cut through the entire city. It wasn't much of a clue. And your uncle's car, Ethan pressed. Do you remember what it looked like? It was big and black. Zoe offered unexpectedly, her mouth full of pancake. And shiny, Ava added. Uncle Julian loves his car. Big, black and shiny. That described half the cars in the affluent West Hills. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He felt like he was grasping at smoke. He had to get more information. The soggy note was useless. He needed a computer, a way to search for news reports of missing children, maybe look up a map of the Penrose Gardens to see what was nearby. His old laptop had died 6 months ago, and a new one was a luxury he couldn't even dream of. Okay, new plan, he announced, trying to sound more confident than he felt. We're all going on a little field trip to the library. The idea was met with enthusiasm from Chloe and quiet acceptance from the twins. Getting them ready presented a new problem. Their clothes from last night were still damp. He ended up dressing them in some of Chloe's spare outfits, stretchy leggings and brightly colored t-shirts. On the tall, slender twins, the clothes were comically ill-fitting, but they were clean and dry. As they were about to leave, Ava tugged on his sleeve. Can we bring the note? She asked. Ethan had left it on the kitchen counter to dry. He picked it up. The paper had stiffened, and the water damage was permanent, but in the dry light of day, he could make out one more partial word he'd missed before. Below Penrose Gardens, in the same elegant script, were the letters Ants. It looked like the end of a name. He folded the note carefully and tucked it into his wallet. It wasn't much, but it was another piece of the puzzle. Stepping out of the apartment building and into the post-storm sunshine felt like entering another world. The air was crisp, and the streets were littered with fallen leaves and branches. As he strapped the 3 girls into his rattling, 20-year-old sedan, he glanced up at the gleaming glass towers of downtown Portland, visible in the distance. Somewhere in this city, a family was in agony. He just hoped his trip to the library would bring him closer to finding them, and not deeper into a mess he couldn't handle. The weight of his decision to help, but to do it his way, settled on his shoulders heavier than any storm. While Ethan Hayes was wrestling with a faulty seatbelt in his beat-up sedan, Eleanor Vance was pacing the length of a floor-to-ceiling window in her penthouse apartment in the Pearl District. The view a stunning panorama of the freshly washed city, and the majestic rise of Mount Hood in the distance was utterly lost on her. Her world had shrunk to the size of the knot of pure cold terror twisting in her stomach. Her daughters were gone. Ava and Zoe, her brilliant, beautiful, irreplaceable girls, had vanished. The last 20 hours had been a blur of frantic phone calls, shrill police sirens, and the hollow, echoing reassurances of people who couldn't possibly understand the chasm that had opened in her life. Her home, normally a sanctuary of minimalist, art-filled calm, was now a command center. 2 grim-faced Portland police detectives, Miller and Chen, were set up at her marble dining table, their functional laptops and styrofoam coffee cups a jarring intrusion on the curated perfection. Her personal security chief, a formidable ex-Mossad agent named Gabriel, was coordinating a private search team on a bank of monitors in the corner. Her phone buzzed incessantly, with calls from her board of directors, the mayor's office, her publicist, all offering condolences and assistance, all reminding her of the public spectacle her private nightmare had become. Eleanor ignored them all. She was focused on her younger brother Julian, who sat slumped in a designer armchair, his face pale and haggard. He had been questioned for hours first at the precinct, and now here. He'd told the story a dozen times, his voice cracking with each repetition. I told you, he was saying to Detective Miller, his voice raw. The tire blew. It was a complete blowout on that back road near the park entrance. My phone was dead. I'd forgotten to charge it. Stupid, I know. I told the girls to lock the doors and stay put. I said I would be right back. The nearest house was a quarter-mile up the road, I thought. But the rain, it was like a monsoon. By the time I got there and used their phone to call a tow truck and then got a ride back to the car, they were gone. Detective Miller, a man with tired eyes, who had seen too much, nodded slowly. And you didn't think to call 911 immediately from that house, Mr. Thorne. You called a tow truck first. I panicked. Julian shot back, his hands flying up in exasperation. I thought they'd be in the car. My first thought was the car getting them out of there. When I saw the empty back seat, that's when I called you. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She trusted Julian. He adored his nieces. But the police saw things differently. They saw a flaky younger brother, an artist with a trust fund and a history of minor irresponsibilities, who had been the last person to see the twin daughters of one of the wealthiest women in the Pacific Northwest. They saw a potential motive. Eleanor Detective Chen said, her voice gentle but firm. We need to consider all possibilities. Is there anyone who might hold a grudge against you or your company? Vance Innovations, Eleanor's mind reeled. She was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar sustainable technology firm. Of course, there were people who held grudges, disgruntled ex-employees, corporate rivals she had outmaneuvered, environmental extremists who thought her company didn't go far enough, and climate change deniers who thought it went too far. The list was terrifyingly long. My security team is compiling a list, she said, her voice clipped and precise, a defense mechanism against the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. But my girls, they are sweet, normal children. They wouldn't go with a stranger. Ava knows the rules. They might not have had a choice, Miller said bluntly. The words struck her like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, a hand flying to her mouth. Gabriel was instantly at her side. We have teams searching a 5-mile radius from the car's location, he said in a low, steadying voice. We're pulling traffic cam footage, satellite imagery from the storm. We will find them, Eleanor. But the city was vast. The storm had been chaotic, knocking out power and flooding roads, providing the perfect cover for someone with ill intent. Her wealth, her power, the fortress of technology and security she had built around her family, had all proven useless against a blown tire and a torrential downpour. She walked over to her desk, her fingers tracing the silver frame of a photograph. It was of her and the girls with her late husband, Robert, taken a year before the boating accident that had made her a widow and a single mother. In the photo, Robert was laughing, lifting both girls into the air. He had been the fun one, the one who taught them silly songs and made forts out of sofa cushions. She had become the protector, the one who scheduled their lives with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to her company, all in an effort to keep them safe. And she had failed. A thought, ugly and insidious, wormed its way into her mind. The note. Julian had mentioned that Ava had been writing a thank you note for her grandmother in the car, a special one on the personalized stationery Eleanor had ordered for her, with their family name elegantly embossed at the top. "Julian," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the murmurs of the room. "The stationery." Was it in the car? Julian looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I think so. Yes. She had her little writing kit with her. Why the police found the car Detective Miller supplied. It was unlocked. The back door was ajar. We found a blanket and some colouring books. But no note. Eleanor's blood ran cold. If someone had taken them and Ava had that note, it could have been dropped. It could be a clue, or it could be a dead end, another flicker of false hope in an ever-darkening world. My name, Vance, is on that stationery, she whispered, the realization dawning on her. Anyone finding that note would know the girls were hers. It could be a blessing or a curse. She stared out the window again at the sprawling city below. Her daughters were out there somewhere, in a mansion, a basement, or a cheap apartment in a part of town she never visited. They were with a kidnapper, a good Samaritan, or she couldn't let her mind go there. Every second that passed felt like a lifetime. And Eleanor Vance, a woman who controlled a global empire, had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly powerless. The Selwood Moorland Public Library was a quiet sanctuary of order and knowledge, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in Ethan's mind. Chloe made a beeline for the children's section, a colourful corner filled with pint-sized chairs and picture books. To Ethan's relief, Ava and Zoe seemed content to follow her, their earlier anxiety momentarily forgotten in the presence of so many stories. "Okay, you three, stay right here where I can see you," he instructed, pointing to a small round table. "Don't talk to anyone and don't wander off." Understand, three heads bobbed in unison. He watched them for a moment, a strange temporary father to a flock of three before heading to the bank of public computers. He sat down, the old desktop humming as it woke up. Where to even begin? He started with a search for Missing Children, Portland. The results were a terrifying, heartbreaking list. He scrolled through them, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and hope. He scanned the faces, the descriptions none matched Ava and Zoe. He felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. This meant they likely hadn't been reported missing for long. It supported the story of them wandering off just last night. Next, he searched for Penrose Gardens. The website was elegant and filled with photos of breathtaking floral displays. He clicked on the Events tab. For last night, there was a special ticketed event listed An Evening with Night Blooming Jasmine. It was a fundraiser for the city's botanical conservatory. He remembered Ava's words, "We were going to see the night blooming jasmine." He felt a small thrill. He was on the right track. He scanned the area on a map. The gardens were nestled deep in the West Hills, surrounded by winding, isolated roads and sprawling gated estates. It was exactly the kind of place where a car could break down and be completely isolated, especially in a storm. Now for the last, most tenuous clue. The fragment of a name on the note. Aunts. He typed Penrose Gardens board members' aunts into the search bar. The results were a jumble of articles and donor lists. He scrolled his eyes, scanning for any name ending in those four letters. Constance, a common last name. Torrance, a possibility. And then he saw it, in an article from the Oregonian about the new corporate sponsorship for the conservatory's main rotunda. The name jumped off the screen. A generous multi-million-dollar donation from Vance Innovations, the green tech giant helmed by local CEO Eleanor Vance. Vance. Ethan's breath hitched. He clicked on the name. The first image that appeared was a professional headshot of a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, high cheekbones and dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant style. She radiated power and confidence. She was formidable. He then clicked on the Images tab. He scrolled past photos of her, cutting ribbons, speaking at podiums, standing beside politicians. And then he found what he was looking for. A candid photo from a society gala a few months ago. Eleanor Vance was smiling a rare, genuine smile, and on either side of her, holding her hands, were two identical little girls in matching velvet dresses, Ava and Zoe. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. It was like being punched in the gut. The world tilted on its axis. These weren't just any lost kids. They were the daughters of one of the most powerful, influential, and wealthiest people in the state. This wasn't a simple case of a family car breaking down. This was a citywide crisis. He was in so far over his head, he couldn't even see the surface. His first instinct was to panic. He, a line cook from a rundown apartment, had the missing millionaire heiresses in the children's section of a public library. They were dressed in his daughter's hand-me-down clothes. The police would think he was a kidnapper. They would take one look at him, at his shabby clothes and his old car, and they would see a criminal. They would never believe his story. He'd lose his job. He'd lose Chloe. His life would be over. He pushed back from the computer, his hands shaking. He had to think. He glanced over at the children's section. The three girls were sitting in a circle on the colourful rug, Chloe animatedly showing the twins a pop-up book about dragons. They were laughing. Zoe, the quiet, withdrawn girl from last night, was actually laughing a bright tinkling sound. Seeing them like that, just three little girls sharing a book, cut through his fear. This wasn't about him. It wasn't about Eleanor Vance's fortune or power. It was about getting two scared children back to their mother. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. What was the right way to do this? Walking into a police station with them still felt like a massive risk. Calling 911 from his cell phone could be traced, and he imagined squad cars descending on the library, creating a terrifying scene for the girls. He needed proof. He needed someone to know the truth before the chaos started. His eyes fell on a television mounted to the wall in the library's corner, tuned to a local news channel, with the volume muted. As if on cue, the news anchor's face was replaced by the very same professional headshot of Eleanor Vance he had just been looking at. Below it, a headline banner scrolled across the screen. Vance twins missing. CEO Eleanor Vance offers $100,000 reward for information on daughters Ava and Zoe missing since last night's storm. The anchor cut to a press conference. A police chief was speaking, but Ethan's attention was fixed on the woman standing beside him. It was Eleanor Vance. On the screen she looked ashen, her iron composure visibly cracking. Her eyes, so sharp and confident in the corporate photos, were filled with a raw, desperate pain that any parent would recognize. She wasn't a CEO. She was just a terrified mother. "If you have my girls," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "please, just bring them home. They are my entire world. Just bring them back safely." The plea, raw and unscripted, hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. The fear for himself, for his future, evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated empathy. This wasn't a problem to be managed. It was a wound to be healed. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't hide. He couldn't strategize. He had to make the call. He walked back over to the girls, his steps feeling heavier than they had a few minutes ago. "Come on, kids," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "It's time to go home, all of you." The drive back to his apartment was the longest 15 minutes of Ethan's life. The news of the $100,000 reward echoed in his head. $100,000. That amount of money could change his and Chloe's lives forever. It was a new car, a down payment on a small house, a college fund. It was freedom from the constant grinding worry about bills. For a fleeting, shameful moment, he understood why people did desperate things. He pushed the thought away. This wasn't about money. It was about doing the right thing. He parked his car in its usual spot and led the 3 girls upstairs. Once inside the apartment, he sat them all down on the sofa. "Okay, listen to me," he said, crouching down to be at their eye level. "I know who your mum is, and I know that she is very, very worried about you. I'm going to make a phone call, and some people are going to come here to take you home. They might be police officers. It might seem a little scary, but I promise you everything is going to be okay. You're going home." Ava's eyes widened with understanding and relief. "To mommy, to mommy," Ethan confirmed, giving her a reassuring smile. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number displayed on the news broadcast, a special tip line. His heart hammered against his ribs as it rang. A calm, professional voice answered. "Portland Police Tip Line, how can I help you? My name is Ethan Hayes," he began, his voice dry. I think I have Ava and Zoe Vance here with me. They're safe. They're at my apartment." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then a sudden flurry of activity. "Sir, stay on the line. What is your address? Are the children harmed?" "Sir, do not hang up." Ethan gave his address, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He answered their questions calmly, explaining how he'd found them, that they were safe and sound. The operator told him not to move, that officers were on their way. It didn't take long. Less than 10 minutes later, the quiet street outside his building erupted. He looked out the window and saw not 1 but 3 black SUVs and 2 police cruisers screech to a halt. Doors flew open, and men in sharp suits, private security, he assumed, emerged, their faces grim. Police officers established a perimeter. It was an invasion. A heavy authoritative knock rattled his door. Ethan took one last look at the girls, gave Chloe's shoulder a squeeze, and opened it. He was met by 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a rumpled suit who looked vaguely familiar from the press conference. Behind them, a woman pushed her way forward. It was Eleanor Vance. In person, she was smaller than she appeared on screen, but she radiated an intensity that filled the hallway. Her expensive grey suit was immaculate, but her face was a mask of raw, desperate hope and terrifying suspicion. Her sharp eyes swept past Ethan, landing on the 2 girls standing in the living room. "Ava, Zoe." She breathed, her voice cracking. "Mommy," the twins cried out in unison, rushing forward. Eleanor fell to her knees, ignoring the worn carpet and the officers, and enveloped her daughters in a fierce, trembling embrace. She buried her face in their hair, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. All the power, all the prestige, all the wealth melted away in that moment, leaving only a mother reunited with her children. Ethan stepped back, giving them space, a lump forming in his throat. This was the right thing. This was the only thing. After a long moment, Eleanor looked up, her eyes, red-rimmed and wet, finally focusing on him. The relief was still there, but it was now overlaid with a cold, analytical appraisal. She took in his worn T-shirt, his shabby apartment, the mismatched furniture. Her gaze was a physical weight, assessing him, judging him. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice regaining its sharp, executive edge. "My name is Ethan Hayes. I found them on my doorstep last night." Detective Miller stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, we're going to need you to come with us. We have a few questions." Ethan's blood ran cold. It was happening exactly as he'd feared. "I didn't do anything," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I was helping them. That's what we need to determine," the detective said, his tone neutral but firm. Chloe, sensing the tension, started to cry, hiding behind Ethan's legs. But then a small voice cut through the air. "He was nice, Mummy." Everyone turned to look at Ava. She had untangled herself from her mother's embrace and was looking at Ethan with wide, serious eyes. "It was storming, and we were scared," Ava said, her voice clear and strong. "He took us inside. He gave us his little girl's pajamas. He made us grilled cheese and smiley-face pancakes." Zoe, still clinging to her mother, nodded vehemently. "And tomato soup. And he gave us a warm bed and Mr. Snuggles so we wouldn't have nightmares." Eleanor stared at her daughters, then back at Ethan. She looked at the plate with the remnants of a pancake, still on the coffee table, at the rumpled quilt on the pull-out couch, at her two daughters dressed in brightly coloured, ill-fitting clothes that were clearly not their own, yet looked comfortable and cared for. Her gaze shifted from suspicion to confusion, and then to something else entirely. She saw the scene not as a potential crime scene, but as a haven. A messy, humble but undeniably safe haven that had sheltered her children from the storm. She slowly got to her feet, her posture still stiff, but the glacial coldness in her eyes began to thaw. She looked at the police officers. "Detective," she said, her voice low, but carrying the unmistakable ring of command. "Perhaps your questions can be asked here. I don't think Mr. Hayes is going anywhere." The detective looked from Eleanor to Ethan and back again, then gave a slight nod. The immediate threat had passed, but Ethan knew this was far from over. He was standing at the epicenter of two colliding worlds, and the aftershocks were just beginning. The hour that followed was a surreal ordeal. While a paramedic gently checked over Ava, and Zoe confirming they were perfectly healthy, Detective Miller questioned Ethan in his own kitchen. Eleanor Vance stood by the living room window, her arms crossed, observing everything with an unnerving stillness. She didn't interrupt, but her presence dominated the small room. Ethan told the truth, a simple, unadorned account of the knock on the door, the decision to bring the girls in from the storm, the fruitless attempts to decipher the note, and the dawning realization at the library. He explained why he hadn't called the police immediately, his fear of the system and his desire not to frighten the girls further. "I was just trying to do what I'd want someone to do for my Chloe." He finished his voice. Quiet. Detective Miller listened, his expression unreadable. When Ethan was done, he simply nodded, closed his notebook, and went to have a quiet word with Eleanor. Ethan could feel her eyes on him. He busied himself with making Chloe a glass of juice, his hands not quite steady. He felt exposed, his life and his poverty laid bare for this powerful woman to dissect. He expected dismissal, a perfunctory thank you, before she swept her children and her entourage out of his life forever. He braced himself for the quiet humiliation of being seen as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. After the detective left, joining his colleagues outside, the apartment fell quiet. It was just Ethan, Chloe, Eleanor, and the twins. Eleanor finally moved. She walked over to the pull-out couch and picked up the heavy handmade quilt. She ran her hand over the intricate stitching. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice softer than he had heard it. "My wife's grandmother made it for us," Ethan said, surprised by the question. "For our wedding." Eleanor looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time he didn't see a CEO or a millionaire. He saw a woman who understood loss. "Your wife?" she asked gently. "She passed away 3 years ago." A silent understanding passed between them. They were two single parents from vastly different universes who knew the unique terror of raising a child alone. Eleanor turned to her daughters. "Girls, what do you say to Mr. Hayes for taking such good care of you? "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," they said in chorus. Zoe, braver now in her mother's presence, added, "And thank you, Chloe, for sharing, Mr. Snuggles." Chloe beamed. Eleanor reached into her tailored suit jacket and pulled out a checkbook and a pen. The moment Ethan had dreaded. The payoff. The transaction that would cheapen everything. She began to write, and Ethan's stomach clenched. "Mrs. Vance," he started, his voice tight. "Please, you don't have to do that. I don't want your money." She stopped writing and looked up, her expression unreadable. "There is a $100,000 reward, Mr. Hayes. You earned it." "I didn't do it for a reward," he said, his integrity, the one thing of value he felt he owned in that moment. "I did it because they were children who needed help. That's all." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes searching his face. She seemed to find what she was looking for. Slowly she tore the partially written check from the book, ripped it into 4 precise pieces, and let them fall onto the coffee table. "You're right," she said. "A check is an insult. It's an easy, impersonal solution, and what you did was neither of those things. It was personal. It was kind." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My company, Vance Innovations, has a charitable arm, the Vance Foundation. We fund community outreach programs, educational grants shelters. But it's all managed from a boardroom 60 floors up. We have data analysts and financial planners, but we lack something essential. We lack people on the ground with genuine empathy. People who understand what it's like to struggle, who know the value of a hot meal and a safe place to sleep." She took a step closer. "Mr. Hayes, Ethan, I don't want to give you a reward. I want to offer you a job. I want you to be a community liaison for the foundation. I want you to help us find the people who truly need our help, to be our eyes and ears in the neighborhoods we only see from our office windows. The salary would be more than enough to ensure you and Chloe never have to worry about a late bill again." Ethan was stunned into silence. A job. A real job, not just a paycheck. A job that would use the very thing he had to offer his decency. And Chloe Eleanor continued, her gaze softening as she looked at his daughter. "The foundation has an educational trust. We will see to it that her college education is fully funded wherever she chooses to go." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, hot and unexpected. He thought of his endless shifts, his aching back, the constant fear of not having enough. He thought of Chloe's bright mind, and his worry that he'd never be able to give her the future she deserved. In one fell swoop, this woman was offering him not just a lifeline, but a new world. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Say yes," Eleanor said, a faint smile touching her lips. And he did. 2 weeks later, Ethan Hayes walked into the gleaming lobby of the Vance Innovations Tower, not as a delivery person or a repairman, but as an employee. He wasn't a line cook anymore. He was a man with a future. That Saturday, a sleek black car, the same type he had once feared, pulled up outside his old apartment building. Ava and Zoe tumbled out, running to greet Chloe, who was waiting on the steps. They were going to the zoo for a play date. Eleanor got out of the car dressed in jeans and a simple sweater. She looked at the worn-out building, then at Ethan. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that money could never express. "You didn't just save my daughters. You reminded me of something I think I was beginning to forget." "What's that?" he asked. "That the most valuable currency in the world isn't money or power," she said, watching their 3 daughters chase each other in a circle, their laughter echoing in the afternoon air. "It's kindness." And as Ethan watched them, this unlikely family forged in a storm, he knew she was right. In a world that often measures a person's worth by the size of their bank account, Ethan's story is a powerful testament to a different kind of wealth, the wealth of character. His simple human decision to choose compassion over caution reminds us that the greatest acts of heroism don't require superpowers or grand gestures. They just require an open heart. The unlikely bond formed between these two families, one from a humble apartment and the other from a penthouse fortress, shows that kindness is the bridge that can span any divide. It's a quiet force that can change lives, heal wounds, and prove that sometimes the richest person isn't the one with the most money, but the one with the most to give. If this story of compassion and unexpected connection touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who might be inspired. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that celebrate the best of the human spirit. Your support helps us continue to bring these incredible narratives to light. Thank you for watching.